players or all player items, and also have been involved in various other features and game design topics in general, mostly related to PvP.
All right, you guys talked a little bit about how you started there. Do you want to talk about maybe the first things you did there? Because it's very interesting to have all of you on, and I just want to give the viewer a bit of an understanding of how you started where you are. I guess we can go in the same order too with David.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I did, wow.
Siema, witam.
Basically, when I was approached with the idea to do Albion, the first thing I did was a lot of research, actually, right? We actually talked to people who had done MMOs before, because we had not.
No dobra.
We did a lot of research. I read absolutely everything.
Na początku się przedstawiają i teraz technik, oficer mówi, że zanim zaczęli w ogóle Albiona tworzyć, to robił bardzo duże badania na rynku odnośnie właśnie gierek MMO. Techniczny koncept gierki.
Albion Online, and I set up the directory structure of the project, and that is largely still there.
Takie podstawy projektu strzelił.
Then we started to write the first lines of code and
I pierwsze linijki kodu napisał.
For the game, right?
I prototyp gierki stworzył. Tak, czyli tą osobę, którą mamy po lewej do góry, David, jest z Albionem od samego początku i takie podstawy gierki tworzył, badania rynku, pierwsze linijki kodu i tak dalej, więc to jest chłop, który od samego początku, od samego źródła, można powiedzieć, siedział w Albionie.
Kind of called in a little while after that.
Robin mówi, że troszkę później do projektu wskoczył.
My entire career has been working on games with swords and spells and RPG stats. And in 2014, I was approached by a friend and also a game designer who said he had just interviewed for a job with a small group of people with a very ambitious project.
Czyli tworzył całe życie, całą swoją karierę w gierkach siedział, w jakiś game designie i tak dalej, w statystykach. I jakiś jego kolega go tutaj przerzucił do tej małej grupki, która właśnie poszukiwała ludzi do projektu Albionu.
Basically the dream come true as a project. I mean, I was an Ultima Online gamer of the earliest days. I imported Ultima Online into Germany when it was released, so I could play it from here. And it was, it was the perfect project. So I joined as soon as I could. And my first role was actually
Czyli zachwycił go projekt Albionu, dlatego tak chętnie w to wskoczył. No i oczywiście była to jeszcze wczesna alfa. No i oczywiście pracował już z Davidem, no bo David był od samego początku.
Mob factions properly defined at that point. We didn't have a main sort of world building idea, and that was one of the earliest things I worked on. And specifically
Czyli jeszcze wskoczył do gierki, kiedy cały czas kształtował się ten główny koncept świata i tak dalej. We wczesnej alfie.
And Michael?
Yeah, I joined then a while after in April 2015 and
Czyli w 2015 dołączył rok później.
And learning all systems. The first big task I had was quite a big one and a very nice opportunity that is kind of to define the core abilities and the core combat for the PvP situation, and that is a very nice chance because often when you join a project,
Michael dostał na początek zadanie z tworzenia takiego koru, takiego rdzenia PvP, skilli i tak dalej. To było jego największe zadanie na początku. I wielkie wyzwanie, które mu podawał.
Worked on this, so the first idea or the direction I wanted to go in was definitely, since I like these more skill-based games, and I'm a big fighting game fan too, I wanted to try to make this combat less about stats and have a strong focus on.
Czyli od zawsze go kręciło tworzenie gierek właśnie z takimi bijatykami, typu właśnie jak są w Albionie, i chciał jak najbardziej stworzyć gierkę, w której będzie dużo zależało od skilla, a mniej zależało od sprzętu.
Perspectives, they had a skill-based combat, and we had also not many skill buttons, so not the traditional MMO combat where you have like 20 skills or so, but
no właśnie, chciał stworzyć gierkę, w której nie będzie tutaj 20 przycisków na klawiaturze, ale też będzie na tyle dużo, że będzie umożliwiała fajne kombinacje, no i też sama walka będzie dość zróżnicowana.
On a global server with that many players in one cluster, so we have to pay attention to that or keep that in mind and build everything around that. But yeah, that was a very
no i zmierzył się oczywiście z takimi problemami jak przepełnienie klastru, gdzie wiele osób naraz walczy.
Well, Albion Online might not have a lot of skills you can use at one time. Like I said, we only have the 6 skills we use at one time, but the combinations of skills, I don't think there's many games out there that allow you to combine skills the way that Albion does.
O, tutaj akurat przesadzę. Shozan mówi, że nie ma dużo gierek, w których można kombinować skille. Oj, w gierkach MMO jest bardzo dużo, w których można kombować skille.
And those pages only have to interact in a certain way. Those skills only have to interact in a certain way. Here, because of the fact that you are what you wear, your skills can be anything, and you're gonna have some really.
No, ale tutaj racja, że Albion się wyróżnia tym, że to, co się nosi, definiuje to, jakie mamy skille. Nie wybieramy jakiejś klasy i że od razu się przypisujemy do tej klasy, tylko możemy cały czas sobie zmieniać te ciuchy, tym samym zmieniając sobie zestaw skilli, który możemy nosić.
That was actually one of the things that I thought was crazy at the beginning, coming from games that were trying to control the balancing to such a degree that nobody would ever approve of such a concept just because it's so challenging to control. But that was part of what I thought was extremely appealing and part of what I still think is very exciting about working at Sandbox and working on Albion Online, is that we never trod sort of the path that other people have already gone, or like that would be safe to do. We really like to
Dyrektor mówi, że
try to do things nobody's done before.
Uważa, że wyznaczają nowe ścieżki dla gierek MMO, że nie podążali za nikim, tylko własną drogą tworzą właśnie Albiona. I takie rzeczy jak balans w systemie walki jest dla nich ogromnym wyzwaniem. I starają się to rozwiązywać inaczej niż inni.
Like I said, I'm one of the founders, so the situation was pretty much that I had a small company at that time, and we were mostly doing games on the Nintendo DS and stuff like that. And then I was approached by by a guy with a concept for a game, and that game was Albion Online, and he was looking for basically looking for a team to build the game.
Czyli
and looking to
David miał na początku małą firmkę i też chciał tworzyć gierki, tak jak inni na jakieś tam Nintendo czy coś takiego. I jakiś chłop mu opowiedział koncept na gierkę właśnie Albion Online. Tak zrozumiałem. No, w każdym razie wtedy się zrodził ten pomysł, jak miał małą firmkę.
I was actually super excited about that, and I'm not really a game designer, right? I'm quite different from Robin and Michael in that regard. For me it was all about the
mówi, że bardzo mu się spodobał ten pomysł, no i poszli w tą stronę.
Build an MMO, that's something I just couldn't let go.
We're going to be looking at some of that alpha footage that you brought in just a moment. Do you guys want to talk about some of the differences that were in alpha before we look at it compared to what actually made it into launch?
No, będą teraz rozmawiać o Alfie.
Talk about what's still there. I guess not. No, there's a lot of stuff still there, but
yeah, it's actually fascinating. I can quickly say what the original pitch was that I was also approached with. The idea was to have a very
A czego się
hardcore
spodziewaliście?
game, something that was more like Ultima Online and a lot less like World of Warcraft, because obviously going to compete with World of Warcraft was insane, right? We were never going to do that. We were, looking to
Od początku spodziewali się, że z taką gierką jak WoW nie mają w ogóle szans się zmierzyć, więc musieli iść w innym kierunku. Chcieli zrobić coś takiego jak EVE Online, tylko w takim środowisku jak LoL, czyli chodzi właśnie o ten rzut.
And not at all focused on PvE, for instance. Initially, we even believed that we wouldn't need PvE at all, right? That we would not need dungeons, we would not need monsters, we would not need.
Na początku zakładali, że nie potrzebują w ogóle PvE.
All be about PvP.
I chcieli zrobić tylko PvP gierkę.
Obviously realized that we need a little bit of content to fill the, gaps between.
I szybko się skapnęli, że jednak potrzebują troszkę kontentu PvE, żeby uzupełnić gierkę. I oczywiście dodali crafting, gathering.
And we were not at all concerned with graphics or appearance, right? The idea was to make a relatively simple game that didn't.
Tak, grafika nigdy nie była najważniejsza w tej gierce, miała być prosta po prostu. Żeby była, wiecie, grywalna, ale nie musiała koniecznie super wyglądać.
So we went for that, but yeah, that was the initial pitch in a way.
I'm very impressed with how the graphics have evolved while still keeping that.
Krzozen mówi, że grafika niesamowicie od tamtego czasu ewoluowała. No, jest na pewno ładniej, no ale gierka pod względem grafiki na pewno nie może się równać z nowymi gierkami MMO, w których te grafiki naprawdę są ładne. Ale kto patrzy na grafikę w Albionie, nie?
You have no idea how much it pains our art director that he has to be, or that he.
Grafika w Albionie jest drugorzędną rzeczą.
Challenges obviously is to be conservative with resources, not only because it's cross-platform, that's one part of it, but also because we have hundreds of characters potentially in a fight, and we don't have the advantage of LOD, right? Because of the isometric perspective, you can't really fade out detail based on distance, which you would normally do in a 3D world game. So yeah, there's a lot of technical or a lot of challenges to the art side, but I think it's a very interesting how from that early version that David built or the guys back then built, the concept evolved quite quickly as we started to notice that there is a big interest in this game, right? Because obviously
mówi, że
didn't start like a big
jest niesamowicie zaskoczony, znaczy był niesamowicie zaskoczony, jak gierka od momentu, kiedy ją przedstawili, szybko ewoluowała i zdobyła zainteresowanie, przez co te ewolucje się nakręcały.
It was much rather we have this idea, we want to do this game, we have limited resources.
Mówił, że mieli małą firmkę, ograniczone zasoby. Wcześniej mówił jeszcze, że wyzwaniem technicznym jest właśnie ten rzut izometryczny, żeby wszystko dobrze pokazać. Mówi, że w miarę jak rośli, także rosły im ambicje i cele sobie coraz wyższe ustawiali. On mówi na przykład o tej orkiestrze, którą tam wcześniej omawialiśmy. Tak, dzisiaj to jest specjalna skrzynia. Tak, mówi, że nie wiedział, jak bardzo rozrośnie się MMO, które jest w opozycji do mainstreamu, czyli chociażby WoWa. Full loot PvP, no, w ilu grach spotkacie taki system, prawda? I na tamtą chwilę Albion no, był rewolucyjny pod tym względem.
Absolutely, and that was also a financial decision because these theme park MMOs easily cost $100 million. And to be honest, we did not have that kind of money, and we were not going to get it. So we knew we had to take a completely different road.
Well, why don't we take a look at that road that you guys took and some of the early alpha footage? I understand that you put together a build and you did a bit of recording on that, and we talked about it just yesterday. Bogle, do you think you can play that for us? Yeah, we're going to introduce it right now.
Okay.
David, you brought with you a build from Alpha, a video.
To jest
what kind of things are we going to see on this?
To jest logowanie z Alphy.
Are we looking at here?
Okay, so this is a very old build that is actually from December 2012. So this is like 6-7 months
2012, czyli sprzed 10 lat.
Yeah, it's almost 10 years old.
Rozumiecie? Prawie 10 lat temu to był pierwszy koncept logowania w ogóle. I nikt poza firmą tego nie widział. O Jezu, złoty. Ale jazda. Ale ta gierka wyglądała jak kwadrat kiedyś.
Placeholder artwork, obviously, a lot of it not finished, very rough. Icons actually downloaded from the internet.
Ale zobaczcie, modele postaci się prawie nie zmieniły. Te bazowe.
Yeah, you see us running around, gathering resources and yeah, trying to build up our first settlement.
Ale super.
Build the first craft buildings, we're crafting the first tools here.
Zobaczcie, pewne rzeczy się mocno nie zmieniły od tamtego czasu. Ale zobaczcie, to wygląda jak jakieś, nie wiem, kurczę, te stare gierki, nie wiem, chociażby jakieś Hirosy.
Yeah, that's a big resource we're seeing right here, big resource node.
Also, something that's changed there is the way that the nodes look completely.
Mówił, że taki wielki, tamto to był taki wielki surowiec, którego zbierał. Siema, Radzie. Zobaczcie, jak pieski wyglądają.
Funny thing about this build is that there's no live animals here because we didn't have any mobs in this build. Originally, actually, we wanted to make the game without any PvE.
Na początku miała być gra bez PvE, więc wszystkie zwierzęta od razu były martwe. Nie było żadnych żywych zwierząt, więc można było sobie skórę od razu z martwych ściągać. Zobaczcie, building in progress jest. Normalnie jak jakaś RTS to wygląda.
More similar to a mobile game, right, where you set up a building and it would say, okay, and now wait 3 hours.
Mówi, że to był jak symulator gierki mobilnej kiedyś, że postawiłeś budynek i okej, teraz będę czekał 3 godziny, aż się zrobi. No, gierka wygląda jak jakieś starożytne RTS, nie?
Very similar, but with a very basic coat of paint.
Yeah. It is basically the same menu still, right? It has obviously received a facelift, but essentially it is still the same menu. That's the player house right there, the tent you just saw. That's was basically the tier 1 player house that you could build.
You still get that on the island too, right?
Yeah, we don't have the tent anymore.
Ale to było 10 lat temu.
We still have the player houses. So you see that a lot of elements are already there, right? We already had all of those ideas. And if you look down in the middle, there's the auction house icon.
Oh, that's the auction house icon down there. So you
auction house jest?
Your auction house and
aha, na dole. Na dole to na środku samym to jest ikonka auction house'u.
It's your home island. It's some kind of home feature. Clearly,
it's something like that. Yeah, it's quite interesting, right? So this version of the game already has guilds. It already has an auction house, even though we're not showing it in this
video. Czy to już były gildie, był auction house?
But it doesn't have mobs.
Ale nie było mobków.
See where the focus of the game was back then.
Czyli rozumiecie, na początku koncepcja była w ogóle zero PvE, wszystko full PvP.
Players creating the content, not the world itself. You don't need NPCs if you've got players to fight.
Yeah, exactly. The red wall we just saw is actually a territory barrier. So we already had territories, and you could close the barrier to let others in or not.
Już mieli terytoria, które
And
ta
the building right
czerwona
here we're
bariera
seeing right now is,
oddzielała
the smelter
i można
building,
było
and you
ustawić,
see
że
that
ktoś nie
there's
może przez to przejść.
a heating system going, right? So you had to feed it with combustible materials and bring up the heat in order to smelt iron.
I trzeba było domki karmić?
Oh, and now we
we're
have
fighting.
PvP.
O, jest fight, patrzcie!
We have PvP actually. You see again all
O
placeholder,
kurde, zobaczcie.
icons, actually placeholder abilities.
Ale bazowo
Pretty much,
te modele zostały do dzisiaj. Zobaczcie to.
But yeah, you
Widzicie
could,
tą zbrojkę?
you could
Widzicie,
already fight.
widzicie te bronie?
Targeting was horrible. There
O,
was
kogoś tam zaciukali.
no balance at all.
O
But
Boże.
there were already different tiers of items, different abilities you could use, and there was already full loot, right? When you killed somebody, you could already pick up all this stuff.
You
O,
are dead and you can respawn.
Yes.
cyk, deduwa.
All right, thank you guys for hanging out with us. And
To było fajne.
Robin, you were saying
Poglądałbym
earlier that it would
więcej.
be easier for you to say the things that had stayed than the things that weren't there, weren't there anymore. One of the things that did stay, and you can see this, is that there's these buttons on the side, for example, because Albion has always been intended to be a cross-platform game. Before we move on to the rest of this, you want to talk about that a little bit, how from the very earliest days of Albion, it really was meant to be a cross-platform game.
Yeah, and I mean that's a bit of a funny story too, right? Basically, when the development on the game was started, it was a time where game engines like Unity, for example, were really beginning to establish their, you could almost say, dominance because of their cross-platform compatibility. And
Mówi teraz o cross-platformie.
it was the time of the tablet hype, where the expectation was that 10 years down the road,
W jakim środowisku było wspierane multiplatformowość?
While we know that is a repeated statement frequently, that the PC is eventually not going to be used anymore, and all the time it's wrong. We didn't want to build on an MMO that would be stuck on one particular platform.
I nie chcieli zbudować MMO, które utknie tylko na jednej platformie. Czyli od początku myśleli też o tym, żeby zbudować grę multiplatformową, że nie zawsze będzie tylko na komputerze, ale też wejdzie właśnie na takie rzeczy jak telefony.
And those are our references. We want to keep going with Albion Online for as long as we can, and for that we wanted something that technologically would be safe, future-proof.
Od razu zakładali, że Albion nie będzie krótkim projektem, tylko chcą, żeby to trwało jak najdłużej, więc też nastawiają się przyszłościowo na jak najdłuższe działanie i jak najbardziej przyszłościowość tej gry, czyli właśnie ta multiplatformowość podciągnie mocno Albiona w przyszłości. Kuba, pokazywali wersję sprzed 10 lat, żałuj, że nie było cię. Zarąbiasta.
That while it might not be true in our home country and a lot of other countries, there are certainly parts of the world that we are only reaching because Albion Online can be played on mobile devices as well as.
Mówi, że jeśli by nie zrobili multiplatformowości, to by bardzo ograniczyło im liczbę odbiorców, którzy na przykład nie mają w ogóle komputerów i grają tylko na telefonach, chociażby w tym momencie. Więc wiele części świata w ogóle by nigdy Albiona nie użyło. I tej kuter. Polecam.
It must have.
Kuba.
If we look at numbers
Witam,
right
witam.
now, we see that like half of the new players are joining from mobile devices. So
Mówi, że połowa graczy w tym momencie gra, znaczy przynajmniej wchodzi na telefony.
Like Robin said, lots of people probably from countries where mobile gaming is dominant and not PC gaming.
Mówi, że uważa, że to też duża część tego, że po prostu są takie kraje, w których więcej się gra na mobilnych niż na komputerach.
A game like Albion Online, you start to realize that don't have that much time for gaming if you're actually working on something like this. You get to play a few of the anticipated titles, but that's about it. And you know, I realized that there is a real big disconnect between myself, for example, and a younger generation that primarily starts playing on mobile devices, and it doesn't necessarily start playing on a PC. Just because also a lot of households have done away with a home PC. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's something really interesting, and anecdotally, you know, there's guilds that are entirely made from mobile players, obviously, but that is something, for example, that I did not anticipate, where I didn't.
Mówi, że mu się początkowa wersja mobilnej gierki bardzo nie podobała, czuł duży dysonans pomiędzy tym, co chciałby zobaczyć.
But I didn't think we would really see guilds that are almost entirely or even entirely made up just from people playing exclusively mobile, which was probably naive from me, but that's just like where I come from, right?
Yeah, clearly our initial expectation 10 years ago was very different. Like Robin said, we had the tablet hype, so we knew, okay, we're gonna be on tablets just in case people are not gonna have PCs anymore and everything is gonna be on tablet. But we completely ruled out the possibility that anyone would play on a mobile phone. Because clearly the screen was too small to ever play on.
Na początku bali się, że znaczy, my nie myśleli u telefona, myśleli o multiplatformowości, ale telefony wydawały się, że będą miały za małe ekrany, żeby można było grać w ogóle w Albiona.
Basically from day one. That is clearly thanks to the Unity engine and that.
And a lot of hard work on our side too.
And a lot of hard work on our sides, yeah. Clearly the art style.
Kuba, mówisz, masz.
Mobile, so for a long time we've followed all the disadvantages of being mobile compatible and did not release a mobile version. So I'm really happy that finally happened. But yeah, for me phones was.
Mówisz, że mieli duże problemy z wypuszczeniem tej mobilki. Też to było tak, że strasznie się to długo ciągnęło. Była taka wersja do pobrania tylko ze strony Albiona, która była beznadziejna. I dopiero potem faktycznie się skupili na tym i wypuścili coś, co działa.
But to be honest, there might be a lot of these players watching right now and thinking like, you know, you guys are so outdated, but you know, you're always a product of your generation and your upbringing. You know, our most intense gaming years were our early 20s and late teens, I guess. And you know, I still carried my PC to LAN parties and the big tube monitors.
My PC had a handle for LAN arcades. That's how often I was dragging it around. And of course now they have their.
Mówi, że jest starej daty, gdzie na LAN party przynosi swoją wielką skrzynkę z komputerem i 2 monitorami.
Play on your phones. I mean, you guys do have phones, don't you?
Yeah, we do.
I want to get back to that video that we just saw because there was a lot of talk in chat. They were really impressed by that. I want to give a shout out to Elsa for helping us with that video and all of the other great videos that he has done throughout the years. There has been a huge shift. I mean, you've always had great ads. You guys have always had great ads, great dev talks, great trailers and stuff, but there's been a shift and a push to have better media in Albion Online. You guys have done a great job. Do you guys have any specifically fond memories of?
No właśnie, JGM z tym jest problem na telefonie. Ja też tak miałem. Że takie proste rzeczy to spokojnie, a jak już było coś bardziej skomplikowane, to potrafiło mi lekko ściąć.
Yeah, absolutely. Fond, I don't know. I remember we at a very early point, I don't know which year it was, probably 14, 15. We did a trailer at an actual windmill. which was a great background. And the only thing I remember about that shoot is that I had glandular fever on that day, and my throat hurt like hell, and I don't know how I got through that shoot.
On chyba mówił o jakimś trailerze, który puszczali. I z tego dnia dostał ogromnej gorączki, coś takiego.
Live appearances completely drugged up on cold medicine because I've had such a bad fever. The Queen trailer, for example, was completely...
Queen trailer.
Actually, that shoot that David is referencing, was one of my earliest videos I did for Albion, and it was also a very poor performance because for some reason, video team we were working with decided to put us on these tall boxes that we had to balance on while doing our talk, so that they could get the windmill in the background, and I was nervous about my first video appearance, and then I had to also worry about not falling off these boxes.
Mówi, że jak pierwsze wideo nagrywali, jakaś ekipa, która nagrywała to, usadziła ich na jakichś wysokich klockach, na których balansował, stresował się pierwszym wideo, stresował się tym, że spadnie, więc mówi, że bardzo słabo według niego to wyszło, nie bardzo mało profesjonalnie. Bo chcieli jakieś tam tło zrobić.
To the execution, to everything. The only thing I regret in that one is it's a very similar situation that my short appearance in the video had to be done in like 1 or 2 takes, balancing on the edge of a staircase, and like not even getting a chance to do this. I think I got to do it twice, but like not really a chance to do anything about like my performance, and I'm certainly not an actor, but I quite enjoyed that overall experience.
I also really liked
Mówi,
how it turned out.
że bardzo ciekawe to przeżycie było, ale bardzo ciężkie. Właśnie z tym nagrywaniem pierwszego w takich dziwnych warunkach.
Our video production. Always lovely to work with those guys.
Jak ty byś miał wydać grę, to jaki typ? MMO? Strategiczne? Nie no, ja MMO preferuję gierki raczej.
It's fantastic, it's funny, it's kind of like just goofy in a way that really... I feel like one of the things that you guys do best, and it's really low-key in Albion, is throw in a little bit of humor here and there. It's always kind of represented in the game. And to show that in your ads, to show it in everything that you do, is kind of cool. It really personalizes you guys as a development team.
And it's bold to do since we're German.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to believe that you guys actually have a sense of humor.
Właśnie Jose nim powiedział, że bardzo miło, że tak długo współpracują razem i pewnie to w jakimś stopniu jest to, że po prostu są wszyscy z Niemiec, że oni się dogadują ze sobą, ale mówi, że jest to bardzo dziwne, że mimo, że pochodzą właśnie z Niemiec, mają poczucie humoru. Ja nie grałem w WoWa nigdy.
Judy Boots is my favorite, I think. And the second would be probably the song about the rats with the passive on the boots.
Oh, the carry weight on my boots.
Yeah,
carry weight on my boots.
Those two are really great. Now that is this type of content. It's really nice to see if you work on this game, like because like the terms of Albion, it becomes like its own words. Like I'm gonna Judy boot this. Like they make a word out of it, and that is very satisfying to see. Like that you have such a connection built with these players that they put this into their everyday vocabulary, kind of like it becomes a term of it on its own. That's really cool. Also, the passion that they create this kind of content is really cool.
I have two,
takie ogólniki rzuca odnośnie slangu Albiona, także tutaj nie ma co tłumaczyć.
Internal communications, we have a fan art channel where like if anybody spots fan art there, we'll throw it in there and just bring,
mają jakiś kanał dla fanartu cały.
And there's one thing that we've been super happy about. There's actually a couple of fan art pieces framed up in the office that we were sent.
Mówi, że trochę fanartów mają powieszonych w biurze nawet.
Created for Albion Online, lined up in the office, and there's a few fan art pieces that we were sent on those walls as well. So fan art is great. And then the other community created content that I personally love is the streamers.
Mówi, że kolejny content związany z Albionem, który kocha, to są streamerzy. Co pozwala łapać bardzo ciekawe momenty z życia Albiona, z różnych bitew i tak dalej.
I can totally relate to when you have like a really tough week and you have
Kuba, byłoby trochę ciężko coś takiego zrobić, wiesz?
still had problems, then it also gives a lot of energy to just watch a stream and see how the players are engaged.
To The Cycle teraz masz właśnie.
Frustrating, but for the most part you see like how much they are engaged and invested into this game and how much they enjoy it, and like you see also cool interactions.
A czego się spodziewałeś? Dywan miał wypaść. Tylko pytanie było, czy jeszcze coś oprócz tego dywanu będzie.
Because there is where you really can see it through the player's eyes, right? Otherwise we kind of have to analyze data. We play it ourselves a bit, but it's very different to see this raw emotion from a stream.
Mówi, że ze streamów mogą czerpać to, jak gracze widzą gierkę od ich strony, jak się reagują na pewne rzeczy.
2% less effective. Don't you know now that I have to quit the game?
Yeah. It's also
No dokładnie, w takich już walkach 5 na 5 byś z pierwszej osoby mało widział, a wyobraź sobie teraz taką walkę 200 na 200.
You get like a specific type of it. I try to pay a bit attention. It always depends on how busy we are. So if I have time, I
tracimy Michaela.
scroll a bit through.
Kamera mu się rozjeżdża.
If I don't reply, I try to read and make notes. If there's a good point, but I can't not implement A. We cannot implement anything they ask for because that would be a very interesting patch. They often contradict each other. And B, the best thing is if you can provide like A, what content you play stuff in, and why you think it is broken. Then often we make notes and investigate it. That means we have to check because we can't take everything as at face value, and we don't. I often don't know the person who's posting this. I'm not involved enough with many members. So some I do know, but a lot of this, it's really hard to filter through what, how reliable each feedback is, because not every feedback you get is that in depth with the game, right? Sometimes they have a very gut feeling reaction and right,
mówi o zbieraniu właśnie doświadczeń, od feedbacku, który otrzymuje w różny sposób, właśnie chyba głównie od streamerów, i mówi, że ciężko jest otrzymać taki właściwy, który by go zadowolił, który by mu dał dużo informacji, dlatego dobrze, że tego jest tak dużo. Żeby właśnie z feedbacku, który otrzymuje, czyli z takiej zwrotki, nie, doświadczeń, że móc wyciągać wnioski i no, coś z tym robić.
While their own emotion to their fans, not to you, who they're trying to get a change from, but to their fans who they want to say, this is how I'm feeling right now, and this is who I want you to know. When you see that reaction from them, you can really go, okay.
Właśnie Shozen mówi o tym, o tych reakcjach spontanicznych, które są na streamach właśnie, chociażby na Twitchu, gdzie mogą obserwować, tak jak wcześniej powiedziałem, jak ludzie reagują na różne rzeczy z Albionem związane, różne sytuacje, które po prostu trafiają, i dzięki temu mają taki czysty obraz tego, co faktycznie się dzieje w gierce. Taki czysty feedback.
That can be very challenging because we have so many different types of content, but usually we also keep like a list of points of stuff that we want to improve.
Ten Robin to w ogóle jeszcze słowa nie powiedział na tym streamie, już trwa 40 minut. Siedzi i kręci głową.
But yeah, we try to keep an eye on that and make adjustments accordingly. And if you have feedback, please don't feel discouraged if we don't react immediately, or especially if we don't reply. We try to keep an eye on that.
Super. Cały czas gadają o tym feedbacku, no już nie można.
We've now thrown in player feedback with the player created fan art and music.
Well, it's similar. It's similar. Honestly, like fan art is often like one of the great ways of seeing feedback. You can see where the passions lie.
Shozen mówi, że fan art to jest bardzo dobry sposób do otrzymania feedbacku od naszych graczy. Nie wiem.
with feedback, sometimes it's a mixed bag. But I do want to get back to the beginning of the game. To
W ogóle jest napisane na dole, że w Albionie zostało zabitych 28 milionów osób ponad.
There may be only like 2 or 3 favorite memories or positive memories, but can we talk about some of those?
28 milionów ludzi zabitych.
I mean, a lot of the positive memories, honestly, from that time come simply from the work and the spirit, and you know, the camaraderie of the sort of work environment we were in, because you know, at the very beginning we were less than 10 people in a flat.
Mówi na początku, że byli w mieszkaniu mniej niż 10 osób i żyli tym duchem tego Albiona.
A group of people that was working a lot.
I strasznie dużo pracowali i poświęcali się temu projektowi. Byli bardzo podekscytowani tym, co budowali.
Yeah, there is this incredible moment when you open the floodgates, and there's just this, you know, basically we have the ability to watch the game, right? It probably doesn't come as a surprise, but we can like open a window into the game and watch the players play.
Mówi, że bardzo ekscytujące było uczucie, kiedy mogli w końcu otworzyć gierkę, po prostu włączyć ją i zobaczyć, jak ludzie grają.
Initial spawn point, you know, on that pier it was back then, into just an avalanche of naked guys streaming into the cities. That is just an incredible sight.
Mówił, że niesamowite uczucie było stać na spawnie i patrzeć, jak nowi ludzie się pojawiają na golasa i biegną w stronę miasta, aby rozpocząć swoją przygodę. Mówił, że wylewali się potokiem. Niesamowite uczucie czuł.
And every time you're surprised that people actually come, right? You've set up this big party and you've invited everyone, and it's still an exciting moment when they actually come in large numbers.
Yeah,
Bardzo się cieszę z tego. Cały czas będą teraz o tym gadać.
That aren't necessarily, I would say, enjoyable memories. Like I have this one memory from an alpha where a player found an exploit during a test phase and we caught that exploit.
Że jakiś gracz znalazł exploita w alfie.
If they were able to get away with what they had gained, that would probably ruin the test phase. So I actually went in on my GM account and appeared in front of this player and said, "Look, dude, you know, we know what you've done. Please hand over the merchandise. You can continue playing. I mean, this is alpha, right? We were supposed to be finding problems, but don't ruin the test." And he was like, "Yeah, I fully understand. Here's like I don't know what it was, 100 billion silver generated." But then he was like, "Can I just keep 100 million for myself?" And I was like, "No."
I'm letting you stay in the game.
Powiedział, że jakiś gracz odkrył exploita w alfie. Mega exploita wygenerował sobie miliardy silvera i dyrektor wszedł na konto GM-a, stanął naprzeciwko niego i powiedział mu: "Wiemy, co zrobiłeś, możesz grać dalej, ale oddajesz pieniądze", i że to jest alfa, dlatego nie dostanie bana. A on powiedział: okej, ale czy mogę zatrzymać 100 milionów? A nie.
Game master actions during alpha to protect test phases and some of them live as well. So there's a lot happening in the shadows to keep Albion safe.
Mówi, że dużo działo się w cieniu, żeby utrzymać Albiona przy życiu bezpiecznego, kiedy właśnie takie exploity wychodziły.
Always monitor the world, and with such a unique economy, it's got to be even more difficult with Albion because it's not an NPC-driven economy. It's a player-driven economy.
Mówi, że dla Albiona było tym cięższe utrzymanie balansu ekonomicznego, że to nie NPC rządziły pieniądzem, tylko wszystko było pomiędzy graczami.
There've been a lot of changes since the launch of the game to now. Are there any of these changes that you would think that some of the newer players might be surprised about that they might not realize weren't things that were available at launch?
Quite a lot.
There's a lot that's changed.
There's a lot that changed. So what was it? One thing is, we might have done that to launch. I can't remember, but the spells were locked on your equipment. I think we changed that in beta already.
Wiecie co? Ja mogę za Robina tam siąść. Też sobie tak posiedzę. Robin to jest dobry ziomek. Posadzili go, żeby było symetrycznie. Rozumiecie? On tam ma po prostu siedzieć i się uśmiechać.
Another thing also that is a smaller thing that is interesting is we didn't have health bars for mobs in the beginning, and we didn't have that at launch. I think a couple updates in. We got these small red health bars that are kind of like in Dark Souls games where you can see how much health. That was really difficult in group PvE because always there was a high risk that everyone focused on different mob and then we
different mobs. Yeah, we had to call out mobs back in the beginning by name.
Mówią o jakichś początkach PvE, gdzie trzeba było robić w grupie jakieś bossy i zawsze było ryzyko, że ktoś zaagruje jeszcze coś więcej.
I think generally newer players will be surprised at, or would be surprised at some lacking convenience options from back in the day.
Nie mam takiego garnituru przy sobie akurat, to fakt.
Right? Like when during alpha, the tutorial was basically here's a couple of Destiny board nodes for you to complete, and here's an island that you can get off as soon as you've completed those. But you know, there was like 10 steps, and then you're out. Go.
Mówił, że Destiny Board, czyli ta tablica przeznaczenia, którą mamy pod B, składała się z 10 kroków i to był koniec. Nic wielkiego. Na początku tak wyglądała.
Consisted of a lot of very smart people who you know had that drive to figure out how the game works and very driven to explore. But you know, down the road, as the game became more popular, drew in a larger group of people also, there was obviously a need to explain a couple of concepts better and do a little bit more I guess hand-holding in the beginning to help people understand what is the sort of game that they've just gotten into.
Mówi na początku, że kiedy zaczęły się pojawiać większe grupy graczy i ludzi ciągnęło do gierki, to na początku potrzebowali jakiegoś takiego początku, jakiegoś tutoriala, żeby poprowadzić ich trochę za rękę, żeby dowiedzieli się, o co w ogóle w tej grze chodzi.
One of the things that I talked with David about last night actually was some of the earliest forms of the game had, I don't want to say like tutorial guilds, but they put you into two different forces.
No pewnie, i jeszcze będą mi płacić za to, że przytakuję jak Robin.
Active wars right from the beginning. Is there any plans to maybe incorporate into the tutorial that we have today or in the future some way to introduce people to PvP in a more concrete way?
Pyta się, czy w tutorialu będzie kiedykolwiek mocniejsze wprowadzenie ludzi do PvP. Bo w tym momencie nie ma praktycznie żadnego.
Accessible PvP experience for players that once you've, you know, managed to grasp a hold of the basic concepts, you can go into faction warfare and rather safely start to experiment with combat. It would be interesting to try and basically get a battleground into the tutorial itself. You always have a question like, who are you fighting? You know, you're relying on other beginners to also be there, which with a 24-hour cycle might not always be that easy to provide. But I'll think about it. It's an interesting thought. Yeah. I think one other thing, by the way, that people would be like, if we're really talking about differences between alpha and the
Zastanawia się w ogóle, z kim mieliby walczyć tacy gracze, którzy by na tej arenie się pojawiali, czy między sobą, między beginnerzy, czyli początkowi gracze mieliby ze sobą walczyć na tych arenkach?
Naive as well about the use of buildings in the game, right? Like in the alpha there were no building plots, there was no building plot ownership. You could just place a building wherever you liked.
W Alfie nie było w ogóle miejsc na budynki, można było postawić gdziekolwiek się chciało taki domek. Mówił, że wszędzie budowali te domki i potem je opuszczali i tak świat był zasypany takimi przypadkowymi domkami. Nie odebrałem jeszcze skrzyni.
The other thing that we realized after we introduced plots is obviously that people occupy those plots and everybody who comes after needs a way to also fulfill that Albion fantasy of building up your own place.
It needs to be competitive at some point. You can't just have permanent buildings that drop down and then people like secure land that can never be used again. You're going to run out of land to fight. And that's what Albion is about. Speaking
I mean, Albion. So sorry, I have to because that's a key point. I think where we are also different from what a lot of other.
Mówi, że to jest kluczowy punkt, w którym różnią się od innych gierek.
What we always try to do is we try to think big. We try to think what would be the awesome thing, but then it also has to work. Right? And you can't just naively assume, if you do something awesome, it's just gonna work. You really have to think about upfront, like, how is this gonna get used? And I think that's something that we're very proud
Mówi, że nie można naiwnie wierzyć, że jak coś fajnego stworzą, to będzie po prostu działać, tylko trzeba też popatrzeć na to z każdej strony.
That we have managed to put into a place where it's constantly working. Example is just the overall economy, right? It's not.
Że to musiało być wszystko oparte też na ekonomii. No chyba o te budynki chodzi po prostu. Te ploty jak wprowadzili i tak dalej, żeby to się kręciło cały czas, a nie utknęło. Największa cena, jaka została zapłacona za plot, jeden plot w mieście, to 675 milionów w 2019 roku. 675 milionów ktoś zapłacił za jeden plot na jeden miesiąc, rozumiecie?
Thing that he does in the game, and he absolutely loves it to the extreme. And there's so many people like him, and it's not just they play the economy. Some of them will play the plots, like the plot ownership, and some of them will be the laborers, for example. That's what they work on, or just farming or gathering. There's so many different interconnected pieces to the economy that it provides a gameplay type for so many different players than just the PvP-oriented players.
Najczęściej używany skill na jakiejkolwiek broni to kół na kuszy. Wiecie, te, które się na hacekach używa. 6,6 miliarda razy zostało użyte.
Right, long before the game was playable for a broader audience, we made videos where we promise exactly that, right? You can be a trader, you can just play the economy, you can just be a gatherer, you don't have to PvP, but you can, etc., etc. So that the fact that this has worked is wow.
Yeah,
and largely also thanks to the players and everybody who participated in the alpha phases and in the beta phases, and then who stuck with us through, the
Teraz dziękuję wszystkim, którzy przebywali przez wszystkie te testy, alfa, beta i tak dalej. Że był to bardzo potrzebny czas do gry, dla gry, żeby wystartować.
Not like we drew them up on paper and put them there and everything would just work. I mean, we went through so many iterations, and I think that's also a strength, or at least we like to think so that we are willing to revisit our concepts and reiterate on the concepts to keep refining the systems. And I know it's frustrating sometimes when basically instead of some new awesome feature, we go back to a feature to put it into better place. On the other hand, I know there's a lot of people who actually prefer us to do that and who don't like when we put new content in. But it's what we actually observe is when an update focuses on new content, we get a lot of messages about all the old content that's not good. And if we do an update where we focus on old content, there's a lot of messages saying, where's the new stuff? So, in reality, we have to balance those needs.
Mówi, że
And that's
jak zajmują
one of the
się
most
czymś
challenging
nowym,
things, honestly,
to
about
ludzie
games
pytają o
that
stare rzeczy, jak zajmują się czymś starym, to pytają o nowe rzeczy. Więc starają się utrzymać balans w tym dodawanym kontencie, żeby poruszać na zmiany właśnie jakieś stare i nowe rzeczy. Mam, ale ta gildia już jest martwa, także będę ją zamykał. Tak, no także.
On the game and are kind of in the know, the rest is working on publishing side things and on working that closely with the game. So there's how with this relatively small number of people are you going to get an idea what the perspective is that everybody has? Because even if everybody in the team plays very actively Albion Online, they wouldn't even have the breadth of experience that is there, right? So we can often understand when players in certain areas of gameplay feel left behind because of certain decisions.
Mówi, że nie są w stanie wszystkiego ogarnąć i zdarza się, że niektórzy gracze ze swoimi kontentami, które najbardziej po prostu im przypadły do gustu, czują się troszkę porzuceni i starają się też takich ratować nowym kontentem.
But yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit on the old versus new content, because you guys just released an update into the fray that focuses largely on that fresh coat of paint, looking at older systems and making them better while still adding a bit of new to it. And I feel it was really well received from the fans, because so many people had been asking, can you look at some of this old stuff? Can you do this? And, we kind of joke around in our office, it is the fan service patch. It's the quality of life. This is the one for the long-term fans. This is for the guys who've been here and asking for these updates forever. And I can tell you, the fans appreciate it. They really do.
Yeah, glad to hear that the Crystal Reader
Nie ma co tutaj tłumaczyć, że jakieś pierdoła gadają strasznych.
Happy that we could finally get it in. And I would like to add a point to what Robin said, this iterative process that
mogliby pokazać coś z alfa testów, nie?
Philosophy and I think what makes the game so strong is we are always trying to react to what the players
dalej gadają. Ale takie pierdółki straszne poruszają.
And then we see how do you play it, and then we need to react on it. So we if players do things differently than we originally intended, then we do not need to definitely block that. We have to see, okay, what are they doing? Does that cause problems? Would they like content to be more pushed into that direction? And then there's kind of this back and forth mentality that is very important, I think, for our whole philosophy, and that is also part of our patches when we reiterate on older content, and it's also very fun, I think, to like refine things and work.
Mówi, że podczas tworzenia tych kontentów lubi obserwować, w którą stronę to pójdzie. No i to w sumie to tyle. Tak można streścić.
How does all of that work? Because that's actually a pretty intriguing and complex process.
I do want to talk about something that you guys changed, and it was a philosophy change. It was a huge change for the game. When you went from 5v5 content for territorial control to ZVZ for territorial control with Queen, it completely changed the way the game was played.
Co ja ci poradzę, Kiltej? Bo nie wszystko trzeba tłumaczyć. Oni teraz takie pierdoły poruszają, że tutaj pożal się Boże. Ja czekam, aż pokażą coś. Jak na razie jedyna część streama, która mi się podobała, to jak Shozen powiedział, że cieszy się, że mimo, że są Niemcami, to mają poczucie humoru, i jak pokazywali alfa testy.
Actually there was a technological component there. I don't know if David remembers.
Yeah, there absolutely is. The thing is that if this had been the original proposition of the game, let's make a 350, 400 people fight literally on the same screen.
Mówi, że początkowym konceptem właśnie było to stworzenie takich warunków, żeby 300-400 ludzi mogło walczyć naraz.
It's always a bad sign if there is no other game in the market that can do that, right? And you're the one, hey, I'm gonna pull that off.
Mówił, że bardzo złym znakiem na początku było to, że żadna inna gierka nie była w stanie tego zapewnić, więc to było wyzwaniem.
Doing relatively good in that department. right? We could actually support much larger fights than we thought. And then of course
Mówi, że był zaskoczony tym, że mogli dużo większe walki wspierać, w sensie sprzętowo, niż się spodziewali.
What can we do to technically improve that? And there is not a single technical decision that enabled that. Right? There was not really a breakthrough moment or anything. It was
Powiedział, że to nie dotyczyło żadnej konkretnej decyzji, nie było żadnego przełomowego momentu. Że to składało się na wiele czynników.
We're talking about 400 people, right? We cannot have a playtest with 400 people every now and then, so we use bots essentially in-house to simulate such fights and to do measurements. And so what we do is we examine very carefully where the bottlenecks are. They are sometimes on the network side, the network hardware.
Jak mierzyli właśnie wskaźniki podczas tych walk, sprawdzali, co jest z tym bottleneckiem, czyli chociażby czy sieć ich nie ogranicza, czy sprzęt, czy coś innego.
And we're still doing that, by the way. To this day, in the last patch, some of you guys have probably noticed, we have released another important improvement to these large fights. We constantly have to, right? Because we keep adding stuff to the game, and sometimes we make things worse, and then we have to fix them again and optimize.
Mówią, że cały czas opiekują się tymi dużymi fightami, że kolejne update'y, które wprowadzają, czasami pogarszają właśnie, pogarszają tą optymalizację tych fightów i muszą cały czas się tym opiekować, żeby była możliwość takich dużych walk.
Yeah, because you got players to do it first, right?
Yeah,
well, what usually happens at the office, if you want to know the real story here, is that me and my team, we get YouTube videos, right, of fights with lag, and then people are like, here's a video, the performance isn't good, this is lagging, you need to fix that.
Mówił, że nagrywali filmiki z tego i dostawali feedback, że to jest zbyt zlagowane, że mają to naprawić.
And then we kind of have to fix it after the fact, right? So it's a player-driven optimization, right? We first ship the feature and then we fix it afterwards.
Yeah, I'm definitely heavily involved with supplying you guys the video.
Robin mówi, on ma głos.
I get a lot of video submissions of lag, and I just pass it on through to QA. Like,
also,
there you go, lads.
we can talk about lag and the associated
Robin ma głos. Co jest?
But to get back to the decision about large-scale fights. So I remember that basically the code team had pushed us forward in the performance of large fights to a point where we were comfortable or more comfortable with that decision. And it was something that we debated for a very, very long time. Because obviously, up to that point, 5 versus 5 fights had been kind of one of the centerpieces of Albion's design.
Mówi teraz, że jeden z takich centralnych punktów, centralnych konceptów Albiona było umożliwienie tych walk 5 na 5 i się na nich skupienie. Nie wiem, jak długi będzie ten live, ale ja nie wiem, ile wytrzymam.
Were just unhealthy for the social structures that were being created in the game. There were a lot of guilds that were just built around supporting a few players having these fights and everybody else having to support them. And we noticed that
Mówi, że było to bardzo niezdrowe dla gierki, że gildie się budowały tak, że wspierały tylko te 5 osób. Wszyscy pracowali na te 5 osób, które miało właśnie w tych walkach uczestniczyć. No i ci nowi gracze trafiając do takiej gildii, pracowali na kogoś innego, a nie na swoją rozrywkę.
In their group, and I think opening this up to large-scale territory warfare was possibly the key decision that we made for Albion Online, because it changed the dynamics at the guilds
Mówi, że przerzucenie tych walk o terytoria na dużo większe grupy zamiast 5 na 5 było kluczową decyzją, która w bardzo dobrym kierunku popchnęła Albiona.
So while we really loved the competitive meta that existed in those fights and the stories that were being created, I mean, you probably still remember some of the names from those days, and we all remember them because we saw them so often. But when a key part of your game is dominated by a few names, then you know that you have a problem if you have an MMO, right?
Powiedział, że mając MMO był content, ten główny content zdominowany tylko przez parę osób. Dlatego w gierce MMO było to dużym problemem, że tylko kilka osób jest widzianych, prawda? Jest na górze i z tej góry spaść nie chce.
And it was also the moment that the game really started to take off. With that change, basically the population numbers started to really grow.
I chyba powiedział, że jak free to play wypuścili, to mega dużo ludzi się pojawiło.
Moment, right? Because that 5v5 was literally in the very first draft of the game design. It was one of the core pillars of the game.
Mówił, że walki 5 na 5 to był filar budujący Albiona od samego początku.
And so we're gonna level the battlefield by making it about 5v5 combat.
Mówi, że większe gildie zawsze będą dominowały te mniejsze, ale był ten poziom właśnie tych walk 5 na 5, gdzie te mniejsze gildie miały szansę.
Clung to that idea, right? Until Robin ran the numbers and said, look, I can show you that it's literally 1,000 players who are, you know, 1,000 out of hundreds of thousands who are playing these 5v5 battles, and everybody else is left out.
Mówił, że tysiące ludzi grało właśnie w te walki 5 na 5.
And while there might have been thousands of characters who participated, that was because several players had dozens of players and alts that they had made so that they can be in multiple areas at once. And at one point, it felt like you guys were playing catch up, like gameplay design wise, to stop them from doing that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. The GVG system just kept growing in complexity to
Emotka to wszystko co można dropnąć na rocznicę. Pathetic.
Ways that our lovely
no, jeśli tylko skiny są, no tak, to trochę pathetic.
Push systems to the edge. So we had to deal with like so many situations that were being perceived as unfair or as exploity. It just was very, very complex at that point already, and that was another hurdle for people to get in, right? Because it was just so hard to understand the logic of launching attacks and then counter attacks, and I can't even remember retaliation attacks. All the stuff that we had.
Mówił, że mechaniki związane właśnie z wypowiadaniem ataków i tak dalej były ciężko zrozumiałe i tak dalej. I też jak oni je wymyślali, to też nakomplikowali trochę.
And still, they always found another way to circumvent whatever we put in there. But I remember this was quite a big discussion internally. It was that was like kind of like a crossroad. Do we keep the system or do we ditch it? And it was quite a big leap to take because, like also David mentioned, we built a lot around that fantasy that those 5 guys can defend that territory. And there was like this crossroad, like, can we fix the system? Maybe we have to improve it.
Bardzo długo zastanawiali się i ożywioną dyskusję prowadzili na temat tego, czy zatrzymać ten system 5 na 5, czy go naprawić, czy zmienić na coś kompletnie innego.
I think one thing I gotta ask you, Retro Man, talking about these large scale fights. The introduction, obviously, outside moving from 5v5s to actual full scale 350 plus battles. One thing that had to come in was the cluster queue system.
Oh yeah.
How hard was it and how difficult was it, you know, to build and think about that whole system.
Mówi, że w pewnym momencie zaczęły się pojawiać na mapie 300 plus osób, więc musieli wymyśleć ten system klastrów i jak ciężkie to dla nich było.
If you could give us a little bit of insight into the cluster queue system.
Sure, yeah, so the cluster queue, so first why we did that even is there was a problem that we need a limit how many players can be in a cluster.
Tak, wtedy pojawił się problem, że muszą zacząć limitować ludzi, którzy pojawiają się na danej mapie, bo było ich za dużo.
What happened is if we had a super high value objective like castles even back then, if there was a huge dispute or a huge fight between large armies, one would just go in 2 hours early and block it completely with 300 players, and then you couldn't enter. And that was how you could decide fights. And that was something. If you remove the 5v5 fighting about territories, then we need to solve that. Then we need to have a way to resolve fights where you could even bring 1000 players. There need to be a way.
Powiedział, że jeśli zdecydowali się na wycofanie tego systemu 5 na 5, to musieli przygotować się na to, że będzie bardzo dużo takich walk, które będą przepełniały klastry. Musieli być na to gotowi.
No, and the other was, one idea was we would create a copy of the cluster. So you have 300 players here, and if you exceed the maximum, we would try to copy players down into like a shadow realm. I kind of imagine like Stranger Things upside down world. It's like a shadow version, and then people could would be teleported down there and keep fighting, and then get teleported up there. Which sounds cool at the beginning, but when you think through all the problems it edge cases, it becomes very convoluted and
chcieli przenosić gdzieś na jakąś taką instancję pośrednią, w której by oczekiwali czy walczyli. A tak, oczekiwali i by potem jakby się robiło miejsce, to z powrotem wracali na tą pierwotną instancję.
Actually it was quite a challenging feature with all the edge cases, and I had to work closely together with David on it. And even now, if you have to make an adjustment, we all
Mówisz, że dywan jest do odebrania?
Again, because there's a lot of edge cases and timing issues when you collect the players for the item power. How do you organize them? Where do you send them? And it was actually quite a challenging feature, but something we had to do. I think overall, I can totally see why it's not an exciting feature for players, because this is just to prevent a problem.
To trzeba otworzyć, nie?
But I think that we added it was a massive, was one of the key things we needed to do.
12 000 osób to ogląda.
To get rid of this 5v5.
No trochę nudzi mnie już, bo tak mało konkretów rzucają.
I think I'm very glad that we did it, and that was also one of those crazy features where they say we don't do it like other games, we do it like the Albion, where we created something completely new that no one does and find a solution for something that didn't have a solution so far.
Mówi, że znowu tutaj zmierzyli się z czymś, co chcieli zrobić kompletnie inaczej niż w innych grach i znaleźć rozwiązanie czegoś, na co jeszcze nikt rozwiązania nie znalazł.
This kind of success when you were dealing with the launch of the game and some of those hard days in the early periods, did you ever expect that it would turn into this?
Well, we were hoping for that, of course. If you ask about the very
Pyta się, czy na początku, kiedy zakładali gierkę, czyli spodziewali się, że dojdzie do takiego momentu, jak doszło.
First of all, a video game is not the best investment for money, and that we would probably have a 20% chance of success, and back then I thought that
dawano im 20% szans na sukces i ostrzegali ich, że ładowanie pieniędzy w grę to nie jest najlepszy pomysł na biznes.
There were certainly times when I thought we would fail. Right? There were dark days. Occasionally.
David mówił, że były takie dni, w których myślał, że nie dadzą rady i że cały projekt się sypnie.
I thought the project was crazy when I joined, right? I didn't join really because I thought that this had such a great chance of success. I joined because I thought it was crazy enough to try. And
Robin mówi, że od samego początku uważał, że był to szalony pomysł, ale nie dlatego dołączył, że liczył na sukces, tylko było to na tyle szalone, że warto spróbowania.
Trying to see if we can make it work and doing our best to make it work.
Czekajcie, bo przełączam się tutaj pomiędzy gierką.
You always work with the expectation or with the
A, bo nie tą gierkę mam odpaloną.
You're looking for success. You're not going to start something where you think there's
włączaj
no
się, Albionie.
chance, right? But I certainly did not
Twitch dropy.
see us, you know, surpass.
Czekajcie, odbierzemy wszystko.
35,000 concurrent players in the game world.
Tak.
That wasn't something I was thinking about back in those
Tak.
days. We were thinking
Dawaj.
about much
Dawaj
smaller
dywan.
numbers.
It really started as a niche product and has grown in accessibility and
O,
reach
jest.
over the years.
Mamy.
And I think a lot of that is some of
Okej,
those
to zaraz zrobimy
special
tego
choices
opening.
that you guys made. The ways that you took a different path rather than the path that other
Dobra,
game companies
te
were making.
skrzyneczki
Like you said,
oczywiście tutaj
nobody
trafiają.
else has a game where you can play
Dobra, mamy opening,
150
mamy
versus
dywan,
150 in a single zone.
dywan
There's
piątej
no other game where
rocznicy
you play 100
i
versus
mamy
100 versus
community
100.
skrzynkę.
And it truly makes
To
it
jest-
absolutely
Takie coś wylatuje
I
na
think
piątą
it
rocznicę
has
Albiona?
surpassed
Oh boy.
expectations. It's-
Nie, no teraz
for
mam
me
zarąbiste
personally, I never
buciki.
expected it to get this big. You know, I thought it was going to be a niche game for me and my friends, but
Ja
now
pierniczę.
people,
Nie, nawet tego nie
I've been
zakładam.
stopped on the street. Like, it's kind of weird, you know. It's
Ten
really cool.
dywan jest
to
podobno
have.
tradowalny,
I
zaraz
have
zobaczymy.
never.
Well, I'm on the
I'm kinda
screen
glad.
more, and I go to a lot of conventions. So you know, it's a bit of give and take. And you know, it's on the street in front of the convention center where there's a bunch of people playing video games. So you know, it's not at the grocery store. Nobody came up to me with their grocery cart, you know, full of a computer, going, "Hey, do you play this
Dobra.
game too?"
Dywan,
Like I
dywan
said, it's
jest już
unexpected.
za pół miliona.
What other unexpected things have
Także
happened?
możemy
What have you seen
spróbować
that
go, nie wiem,
players have
450
done that was
tysięcy.
truly
Zaraz to będzie jeszcze
unexpected?
tańsze.
You weren't.
Także
You saw that and you like, what the? Why?
This uncountable things like that. I want to share one anecdote before we tell this story, because I think one
po
thing
co
that
się inwestować w te
players
działo nowe?
realized is
Jak one
that
się nazywają?
I talked earlier about how difficult it is to see how players are playing the game. And you know, not everybody in the
Czekaj, to
team
będzie vanity.
is into the game or understands
Consumable,
the
oh.
game on the same level, right? We have people who are super into the hardcore PvP aspect. We have people who are super into the economy. We have
Po
people who are
ten.
superficially playing a little bit of. We have every kind of style of play at the office.
Po ile? Po
that
14 milionów się
what we
najwyż
try to do
sprzedawały te działa.
Is to have in every room one big screen where the game is running and where we follow a random player.
Średnia
that is
sprzedaży
currently
15
playing the
milionów za
game
te
live
działa.
for a period of about 30 seconds before we switch to the next player. So we effectively kind of just observe what are people currently doing in the game. And this has been one of the most exciting ways of seeing crazy stuff happening, because that mode takes you all over the game, right? Like it takes you to Hellgates, it takes you to the roads, hideouts, everywhere. So you see, and player islands is one of the most exciting things. Like, what do people do in the privacy of their islands?
Yeah.
You don't want to know.
Like Exion's roleplay
Mówisz, że podglądali ludzi, co robią sobie na wyspach? W swoim prywatnym zaciszu?
And it is a really cool way for us to get an impression what are people actually doing in the game, because obviously because it's a random selection of a player, it's kind of statistically represents things that people are doing often, frequently on those screens, and things that are happening rarely. And people in the office working, they just kind of see that on the side, and they're always aware of what's going on in this world. And I'll tell you now, if you're trying to do weird stuff in the game that might not be within the license agreement or the terms of the game, we have spotted more than one person doing weird stuff with this system, and it has led to game exclusions. Seeing what people have done there.
Mówi, że wyczaili więcej, znaczy kilka osób, które bardzo dziwne rzeczy w gierce robią, ale...
Seeing what people are doing and kind of keeping things in check, on top of everything else that we have, right?
No ale
Because it's just you see, for example, how
to jest
people are
bez sensu, co oni mówią.
standing in a dungeon and you know, treating a mob that you spent hours and days lovingly tweaking the values of this mob and thinking about how players are going to play it, and then you see them standing in a corner exploiting a collision issue to not get hit by the attacks that you so
Mówi, że dopieszczali mobki dniami i nocami, żeby potem zobaczyć, jak jakiś gracz po prostu wykorzystuje jakiegoś buga, którego nie przewidzieli, żeby nie dostawać obrażeń.
I mean, stuff like, for example, guilds gathering on guild islands. If you're not part of a guild yourself that
Co
has
ty gadasz,
the
Kacper?
scale of people,
Ale to działo
you
da
as
się
a
sprzedać?
developer would never see that moment of the game. You would never know that those places are being used for staging large guild operations, for example. But in that way we do, and that's cool.
Absolutely.
Jezu, jak zaraz nie powiedzą czegoś konkretnego, to ja też wykituję na tym streamie.
How they try to game our systems, that's often surprising, but kinda expected. A few other cool details were when they did a soccer game with rabbits on an island, just with knockbacks. That was a very cool and creative idea. When I saw that, I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. Another cool thing was the Albion Museum. That was really surprising. That actually was a really cool moment for us too as developers. We said, oh wow, players actually built this. That is cool.
Mówią sobie, że to wyspa o robieniu rzeczy na nich, że ludziom się to spodobało, że robili tam dziwne rzeczy, co robili w ogóle, podglądali w prywatność ludzi na wyspach, co tam odwalają. No, takie pierdu cały czas.
But sometimes we'll get sent over to something else, and I'll get sent over to a random group of 30 people standing in a shape using their spells to make art or some nonsense like that. And I'm like, why? Why? Like you didn't know I was coming? You didn't know this was going to be on TV? What are you doing?
Yeah, like the recent rave party I saw on what was it, Ninush's stream. Yeah, that was pretty cool too.
That was really awesome to see. I love seeing, like, that's when Albion spills out of the game into the game outside the game, and that community that you guys have built gets to continue on and do something else. And I feel like that's the most special thing that we get out of working in MMOs is that the fact that you're really building a community, not just a game. Other people build.
Mówisz, że najważniejszą rzeczą w gierkach MMO jest budowanie społeczności, bo społeczność to gra MMO. Jeśli nie ma społeczności w gierce MMO, no to gierka się rozpada.
It's actually the work is never done.
Thank you for being here. On that same vein of like things that surprised you, what was the biggest oh crap moment you guys had when working on this game, where things went completely wrong and you were like, I'm not coming into work tomorrow?
Well, that's never happened.
Okay.
Because normally when you have such a moment,
mówi, że nigdy nie było takiego momentu, że nie chcieli przyjść do pracy.
It's gonna be a long night.
And the next day you have to deal with whatever fallout you couldn't deal with on that day. There's no exemption to come back to work if you screwed up.
No. I guess what you're looking for is
że nie było mowy o tym, że jeśli coś się zrąbało w gierce, żeby nie przyjść następnego dnia. No, strasznie.
Robin doesn't want me to tell these stories because we need to appear to be in control all the time, but the truth is that there are these oh crap moments, right? There was this one occasion, and I believe it was during beta, but I'm not sure.
Mówi, że był taki moment, w którym nieźle nawalili.
With the database setup essentially, and my intention was to run a test on my local machine, but I had misconfigured something, and my local database connected to the live database of the game and essentially took down the game in the process. And everybody was offline, and my phone started ringing, and someone was, David, the game is down, and
mówi, że chciał puścić test lokalnie, a niechcący połączył swoją bazę danych razem z serwerem i wszystkich odłączył.
There were even situations, I don't want to go into details, there were even situations where I thought I had
Że wymsknęło mu się, źle naklikał i zamiast przeprowadzić test na swoim komputerze, przeprowadził na serwerze.
when you thought you might have just killed a multi-million-dollar game.
I want to reassure our players here that the daily maintenance process is there to ensure there's always live backups that are in place in case anything like that ever actually happens.
Mówi, że dla technicznego punktu widzenia te dzienne restarty serwera są bardzo przydatne, żeby utrzymywać wszystko tak jak trzeba i żeby dane, które każdego dnia skrywają na bezpieczne miejsce, do bezpiecznego miejsca, że są pewni, że to wszystko się trzyma.
She's an event manager and she always tells me, you know, about her 500 people parties and all the stuff that goes wrong, and then I'm always like, you know what, I just kicked 30,000 people out. And they're now waiting in front of the venue. And they
Mówię, że czuł to, że wywalił 30 000 osób i wiedział, że przez niego wszyscy się gapią się w ekran. 30 000 osób przez niego się gapi w ekran i czeka, aż serwer wystartuje.
While everybody is waiting, and everybody, you know, you're very aware that everybody's waiting.
Yeah, 30,000 people, you get used to it actually, right? The first time it's kind of strange, but
just a few messages, you know.
You know, it's operating a single server game.
A to już wiesz, to jest inna sprawa, Kasper.
I say single server, obviously from a technology point, it's a lot of computers involved, but it's all one connected cluster of computers that are operating in unison to create.
Mogli drunk streama zrobić? Oni się tak trochę zachowują, jakby byli pijani tą grą.
To keep that in a good state, I think, than if you have a match-based game, for example. I mean, I don't want to, you know, match-based games have all their own challenges, but like in particular, keeping that one server in a good state all the time when you have things like hardware failures, you have network issues that obviously are not in your control, and on top of that, you're constantly updating this thing. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and some of them are within your control, and some of them really are not. Like
Mówi, że utrzymywanie jednego serwera, no bo tak jest w Albionie, przy ciągłych update'ach, technicznych problemach z sprzętem, z siecią i tak dalej, jest nie lada wyzwaniem.
What is the best place for all of our players where we can put this? But there's also a lot where there's just issues on the internet, and we have to we are being asked to deal with those issues, and sometimes we can put pressure on providers to look into certain issues, certain routing problems or whatever, but it's, you know, in the end, we don't have our own internet.
Right, you don't make the internet.
We're sharing this with everybody else. I think I mean the biggest oh crap moment for us was post-launch, to be honest. I mean, this was heartbreaking because we worked towards the launch so very hard, and then we were hit by a number of issues. The first one we were responsible
Przy jakimś update'cie mówi, że mieli taki crap moment, że tak wiele błędów im wywaliło po tak długiej pracy.
Specifically for launch, because we really wanted the game to do well at launch. But unfortunately, there was I think it was a multi-CPU issue with the database.
Yeah, no, back then it was a very strange thing with the RAID controller.
Mieli jakieś poważne problemy z bazą danych.
Database machine not giving the database the performance it needed. It was a very obscure issue, and in the end,
że bardzo ciężki problem wtedy napotkali i nietypowy.
Basically hired a consultant for that type of database.
I zatrudnili kogoś od baz danych, bo nie poradzili sobie z tym.
Computer, blah blah blah.
That was the first post-launch issue.
Cannot plan for, right?
Exactly. And this was purely a result of us actually wanting to upgrade the hardware to make things better, right? But then the second issue that hit us hard, obviously, were the denial of service attacks post-launch. And there we have to admit that, you know, we, like David said originally, we're not a team of veteran MMO developers. We didn't come from the big MMOs back in the day, but, you know, this is...
Mówi, że,
we've been doing it for a very long
że
time now,
mierzyli się z tymi
but it was our
problemami
first
bez
MMO,
doświadczenia,
and
bo
we
nie
learned
zdobyli
a lot
żadnego,
about DDoS.
będąc w jakichś większych spółkach prowadzących MMO, bo nigdy do takich nie należeli.
Were just a very terrible experience for the players because of the frequent disruptions. But from a team perspective, those
Okay,
were
monster.
nightmare days because we were working, you know, whenever we were awake, we were trying to work on this, and we had this exact thing where what David was saying with 30,000 people wanting to get in and not being able to. And you're trying to deal with the issue, and really a lot of it is very much out of your control because you're
Trzeba chyba zrobić jakiegoś giveawaya,
with hosting partners. You can move at their speed.
bo się śpioch robi strasznie na tym streamie.
Yeah, we had a bunch of very terrible weeks. You know, where you also have to deal with people claiming that you're somehow falsely claiming that it's a DDoS attack, that you just didn't prepare for the servers or whatever.
Teraz mówią o atakach DDoS-ów, które doświadczyli.
That was probably the most heartbreaking and oh crap moment for the team.
For the players, it's all the same, of course, right? They can play the game, right?
Ale śpiocha robią na tym streamie. Boże. Dobra, hasło to zzz. Zapraszam wszystkich do wzięcia udziału w giveawayu. Na 400 000. Wystarczy napisać na czacie zzz.
And I can't really blame them, right? Because from their perspective, they just want to play the game. And
yeah, absolutely.
Waiting for
and that's why we learned so much
that
about that stuff.
Yeah. Like the players had been, for some of them, had waiting almost 3 years at that point to play your game. They'd been actively involved in the testing. Everybody's showing up to beta, like you said. You watched over and over again on those beta.
O, co jest? Halo, halo?
Beta releases that those little nodes where the people would spawn, it would just fill up and then they spread out into every direction. You saw that so many times. And release, people were making, you know, I hate to bring it up, but that 27-page document.
Teraz będziemy łowić ryby na wyspie, będzie ciekawie.
Advantage. I see some smiling faces on there. Everybody had a guild like that, I see. Yeah, we all prepared, and then it was so rough. And a lot of players don't realize how rough for you guys it is because it was your baby. It was the thing you've been working on forever. At that point, David had been working on it for 5 years, getting ready for
Dobra, będzie prawie 500 000 w giveawayu.
Work, and then everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and somehow within, I would say, about 2 years, you guys had really started to turn it around. And let's talk a little bit about that. What were some of the most fun challenging things that happened that weren't awful?
A teraz pytaj ich o najbardziej przyjemne doświadczenia z gierką. Najprzyjemniejsze momenty.
Oh, there are a lot of systems that I'm really proud of. For instance, one of the areas I'm mainly responsible for.
W sumie Frosty to tak
combat and
gadają cały czas o tym, co było, czyli jakie problemy mieli, jak stworzyli, za co byli odpowiedzialni, jaki był koncept. Ale bardzo fajne było, jak pokazali, jak wyglądała gierka 10 lat temu. To tam gdzieś na początku streama, nie wiem, coś koło 20 minuty. Pokazywali właśnie, jak Albion wyglądał na samym początku. To było fajne. To była jedyna rzecz, która mi się podobała tak naprawdę dzisiaj. A tak to pierniczą bez sensu cały czas. Ten Shozen próbuje z nich wydusić cokolwiek. W tym momencie już gadają o tym, jakichś DDoS-ach, jakie mieli, że zatrudniali jakiegoś gościa do baz danych, bo im się coś rozwaliło.
Like when we got multi-spell, so that you can change the spell button, what can we do is we can create this mimic ability where you can maybe mimic someone, because we have another feature where you can ask for the weapon someone is wearing and then
No,
you kind
no
of
właśnie
and that is
to mnie najbardziej ciekawi, jakieś newsy, więcej filmików, materiału jakiegoś, a nie tylko patrzę na ich gęby od półtorej godziny.
Probably the introduction of Wargloves was a lot of fun because creating a new weapon line from scratch was like kind of like in the old beta phase where you start on and designing everything from scratch was really fun. Crystal Arena recently was
Lejka, napisz mi jaki masz nick, albo nie dam ci dostęp do skrzyneczki.
That proved to be quite good in the long run already, but then the whole ranked system on top and how do we try to match players, and we have a patch where we improve this, by the way. There are a few issues with this
Straszny śpioch jest ten stream, mówię.
But that was really a lot of fun because
Aż straciłem wenę do tłumaczenia czegokolwiek.
Its own challenges, and that's probably what from my side in recent times at least.
I think
Dobra, mamy nick.
my answer to the question is it's just all very enjoyable. I think otherwise we wouldn't have made it this far. I mean,
Zbieracze kamienia F. Taka wyspa. Zapraszam cię do odbioru itemków. Znajdziesz je w zakładce magazynek. Prawie 500 000.
Every time I get to work on the game itself, or we get to drive the direction for a feature or do something creatively. Like last year, I was heavily involved in the music extension, right? Like I did most of the direction.
Mówi, że w poprzednim roku był bardzo mocno zaangażowany w oprawę muzyczną Albiona. Bardzo ciekawe.
Brilliant. Working to improve the game. I love, if I have the opportunity, I love sitting down with a feature and doing the balancing and like going really in depth with the economics or the rewards or whatever, building massive Excel sheets to do calculations whenever I get to do that. That's great.
Mówi, że bardzo lubił się pochylać właśnie nad tymi aspektami typu balans walki.
Even late time emergency operations, when you know there's an issue, you have to either the game went down because of a technical issue or there is some kind of situation being reported that you have.
Mówił o szybkim reagowaniu.
You're enjoying
To chyba o hotfixach mówi.
Because I get post-traumatic stress syndrome from that now.
I do too, but also there is a big satisfaction going to bed knowing
Mówią, że mieli
save the game one more day.
Uczucie stresu pourazowego po tamtych problemach.
Everything's good again.
Usually it starts with getting out of the bed in the middle of the night. Right, that is also the reality of game development. And wasn't it one of your ex-bosses who said like an online game is very much like a farm, right? When you get up, the first thing is you check the animals, and the last thing before you go to bed is you check the animals. And an online game is very much like that, right?
Yeah,
Full of animals.
Dowiedziłem trzeci prozę.
Anybody checked on Quick Swipe lately? Oh, one of the animals of Albion who used to constantly do the edge case. He was always coming up with different things that you guys would have to fix, and
Mówią cały czas o jakichś swoich uczuciach odnośnie sprawdzania gierki, że rano kiedy przychodzili i wychodzili, sprawdzali jak się gierka ma, porównując to do zwierzątek.
Yeah, I remember one time where he made that literally impossible, because what he was doing at one point is he was standing around boss mobs.
Wiecie co? Nie mógłbym jak Robin. Robin do tej pory utrzymuje uśmiech na twarzy, ja już nie mogę.
Waiting for them to get knocked down, re-logging into the game and murdering those guys. And I remember Michael had to take care of that at the time. As just like, what is this guy doing?
I personally love it when people get creative, right? That other time there was this exploit, the game designers called it, right, where people committed suicide in front of the invisibility shrine, you know, hoping that some poor fool would try to loot the body and thereby, you know, give up the invisibility buff. So like,
mówi teraz o wykorzystywaniu tej mechaniki znaczy ogólnie. Mówi o tym, jak gracze sprytnie próbują obejść mechaniki typu właśnie jak były te invisibility shrine, czyli te kaplice niewidzialności na portalówkach. że
bad
suicidowali się
player
przed
is fine,
tą kapliczką i liczyli na to, że jakiś cymbał podejdzie i po prostu zbierze, znaczy straci bańkę po prostu zaglądając do tego ciała martwego. Tuż przed tym szrajnem, tuż przed tą kapliczką. Tego typu rzeczy. No, pewnie też w głowie mają na przykład przesuwanie mamutów z żółtej na czerwoną i ich tam zabijanie.
Steam launch, then we had free to play, the extended language support, and most recently the mobile launch. Do you guys have any future plans to expand the reach of Albion Online?
Yeah, I was wondering when we're going to get to the present and the future. Well, it's very, very difficult coming from that, you know, we announced the game with a mobile version, and then it took us 8 years to deliver on that mobile version, to go out and make any kind of promises. All I can say at the moment is that yes, we are definitely looking to expand the reach of Albion Online even further, and that includes potentially other platforms as well. But that's not a heavy focus at the moment. But it's also not something that we're completely ignoring. So you might have noticed that we did a Steam Deck compatibility. There's a beta version of a controller support for Albion Online now in the game.
Mówi, że wprowadzili
We're very lucky to have
coś tam na Steamie, Steam Deck, wprowadzili beta wersję dla kontrolerów.
This isn't a huge drain of resources on the team. It's, you know, one person dedicating their time to doing these things.
Mówi, że jedna osoba jest do tego przeznaczona w zespole, cały czas się tym zajmująca, rozwijaniem w tym kierunku. O, widzicie? To, co pokazuje tam David.
Gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, okay. So what you're saying is people should go out and make sure that they help beta test those controller support.
Absolutely, yeah. We love, you know, if you are...
Showzen mówi właśnie o tym, że ludzie będą teraz testować wersję Albiona właśnie na ten Steam Deck na właśnie wsparciu kontrolera. Czy to będzie działać dobrze.
It also works on mobile, by the way, right?
Frosty, a ja dostałem kosę od typa, kiedy byłem ubrany cały na niebiesko. Strzelałem się z 2 typami, którzy mieli fioletowe bronie, jednego zabiłem i nagle mi z dupy wybiegł gościu z kosą i dziabnął. Tak dzisiaj zginąłem. Zakosowany przez typa, bo akurat wyciągnąłem sobie stema, żeby się poleczyć.
Which leads to a completely different way to interact with your game. It kind of removes some of this the stressful anticipation, and I like that.
I will never understand you people, but yeah.
So you guys have reworked many of the systems in the game so far. We talked about that briefly and how, you know, it's hard to balance reworking old systems with bringing new systems into the game. Are there any other old systems that you guys have not reworked yet that you'd like to see get a fresh?
Pyta teraz, czy jakieś stare systemy jeszcze planują update'ować.
Micha first, maybe? I have...
Mercenary, najemników dzbany, w końcu zupdate'ujcie pracowników na wyspie.
The world bosses actually is something like the home bases that we call internally world bosses. The Earth Mother and the Demon Prince is something that we would like to overhaul more. Also, of course, islands is always a topic that we have on the mind. I think
Wyspy?
in the fray we tackled a few of the things that we wanted to do for a while. It was the Crystal Arena and the Castle Oats. In a smaller scale, we didn't went crazy in scope, but we made a nice...
Wyspy, arenki, zamki to są tematy, które im teraz siedzą w głowie. Odnośnie właśnie zmian.
I'm not sure everybody's aware of what we're doing right now because we haven't actually managed to put out a roadmap dev talk yet. Unfortunately, because by the way, maybe if you're watching and wondering why is everybody sitting at home rather than our lovely studio, I finally, after 2 years, caught the big C and have been out with a COVID infection.
No na pewno, Frosty.
But that's why we haven't been able to put out a roadmap video yet, unfortunately. But obviously we're working on what we announced in the last roadmap video, which is the rework of the roads of Avalon. The introduction of the mists as a new
Ale znalazłem fajne miejsce, Frosty, do farmienia setów, wiesz? Mogę ci pokazać.
Open world
Zarąbiaste jest. Siedzisz sobie tam i chłopy same przychodzą, nieświadome ich rozstrzeliwujesz. Obraz w obrazie z YouTube'a?
And other features associated with that. So
A czym ty to mówisz?
The biggest rework that's coming, I guess, is the Roads of Avalon, which a lot of people have been asking for. And then, you know, while we're working on one big update, already in the back of our minds, obviously we're starting to shape up what's going to be
Chyba
next
mówi teraz o tym, że mają zamiar wprowadzić jeszcze te zmiany ze ścieżkami Avalonu. Pamiętacie te misty, które miały być awalońskimi ścieżkami jednoosobowymi? Gdzie był jakiś taki content właśnie 1 na 1? No to chyba to jest kolejną rzeczą, nad którą się będą pochylać.
There's another actually thing that we are working on right now is improving the whole way that people get into guilds.
I teraz
better recruitment option for guilds.
Teraz skupiają się też, pracują nad, można powiedzieć, systemem dostawania się do gildii, systemem rekrutacji i systemem dostępności do tych gildii, żeby to było dużo przystępniejsze niż w tym momencie jest.
On what we have in terms of economy, but also improve some of the existing economic.
Muszę ci pokazać, Frosty, zarąbiste miejsce jest.
Lot of things we're thinking about there right now.
A kile są banalne w tym miejscu, naprawdę.
List of things that are kind of in between a rework and a new feature. That obviously we want to get around to someday. You know, territories is certainly a thing that we had even considered for this update to make a pretty major change to the territories. There's certainly going to be, you know, looks taken at that. Maybe a little bit generally, how do we approach kind of finding what we're doing, right? Because with Albion, it's not like we have a 10-year master plan that says like we're doing this, then we're doing this, then we're doing this, then we're doing this. The reason why we don't have that is because it makes no sense to even build that plan.
Oj, z tej skrzynki to raczej nikt się nie spodziewał czegoś wielkiego.
The first half year of its existence, because we try to react a lot to how the players are actually playing the game, and that means a lot of the decisions we make in the midterm are influenced by player feedback. We have things like our forums.
No i znowu mówił o jakiejś przyszłości, że byli na początku bardzo mocno obserwowali, w jakim kierunku w ogóle gracze chcą się rozwijać i na tej podstawie budowali grę, zbierając feedback, ale to już rozmawialiśmy o tym. Czemu znowu to poruszasz, gościu?
And there's always a combination of like pulling from the stuff that we would like to do and the goals that we have, and then the stuff that the player base brings to us.
Mówi, że zawsze znajdują jakiś kompromis pomiędzy tym, czego szukają gracze, a co oni sami wymyślili jako kolejny cel.
Seasonal timings, like for example with this last update, we wanted to focus on things that had to be launched in the off season.
O co chodzi ze skrzynią? Otwórz sobie. Odbierz i otwórz.
That can be introduced in the middle of a season because it doesn't impact the season so much, so that we're more free in choosing a launch date, right? So that there's a lot of things to be considered when planning an update, and that also shapes.
Tak, rework Arcane'ów i Frostów ma być przecież.
Tackling, like, you know, sometimes we might work on a feature not because it's necessarily the number one thing that
No
we
i
need to
te
do
misty
right
też
now,
już wiedzieliśmy o
but
tym
because
wcześniej.
we have the opportunity
Także
in terms
o
of
gildiach też
human
mówili, także
resources
ja
or in
na
terms
razie
of
się
timing
niczego
of our
nowego nie
day.
dowiedziałem.
And oftentimes you will see those things in the convenience features that we're introducing, right? Like in this update, for example, there were a lot of smaller
No
convenience things
strasznie
that
z tej
we
skrzydeczki
introduced
poleciało.
that, you know, maybe aren't the number one thing that everybody needs, but when you have the chance, do those.
I tam jakiś skin do budków poleciał i parę tokenów, także nic
Sorry, very
wielkiego.
long answer for a simple question.
Well, you've answered
The
my
answer
next
is-
question, Robin,
the-
actually.
But the answer on the rework is basically everything in Albion is always up for a rework when there's an opportunity.
Well,
No, but like,
go ahead.
I definitely think like islands is one of the big ones that I wanna tackle, and also, yeah, how do people actually make this process from starting out as a person that knows nothing about Albion Online into a high-end endgame, player participating in large-scale PvP or competitive Crystal League or whatever your endgame might be in Albion Online. How can we shape that journey in a better way? And then obviously, of course, how do we keep the endgame interesting, whatever your endgame is, right? There are so many different endgames in Albion Online that it's
Jezus,
not possible
Robin,
to
powiedz
address
coś
everything
nowego,
in every update.
naprawdę.
We try
Teraz gada o przygodzie każdego gracza, że co robi na początku, co robi w środku gry, co robi na końcu, w endgame'ie. Jezu, oni tak gadają o niczym, że ja bym mógł tak gadać. Siema, jestem MK i teraz będę prowadził live'a.
So you probably have a set of
To jest tego
principles
typu
that you have in
content.
place for when you're doing updates. This is what it can't affect. Like we don't want to affect the seasonal competition. We don't want to affect the Crystal League, for example. All those things have to be in consideration when you're doing a long-term planning. How far out do you actually?
Teraz Shazen mówi, że trzeba wszystkiego pilnować w każdym sezonie. Jeśli chce się myśleć o długotrwałym istnieniu gierki. Typu właśnie te walki 5 na 5, żeby to było competitive, wiecie. Myszkę sobie poczyszczę, to jest takie ciekawe.
Everything figured out for a concept and you're just waiting for the development resources to get the concept done.
Ty chcesz jeszcze pograć sobie w The Cycle dzisiaj? Prosty?
About the concept for a very long time and spend the time iterating on involving a lot of people, getting a lot of feedback, all of that takes time when you're working on
Kurczę, szkoda mi mojej myszki, bo tak już się z nią zaprzyjaźniłem, a scroll mi w niej padł.
Concepting is the main bottleneck, then it can be that our future outlook is very short, and by that I mean a couple of months, 6 months or so.
Mówił, że nie mają za bardzo planów na przyszłość, tylko na parę miesięcy do przodu i że ich głównym problemem jest teraz znalezienie kolejnych pomysłów na rozwój.
It really depends on the situation, and like we said, we always commit for roughly a 6-month time frame, for like a period where we are very, very clearly know what we're doing, and we know where like 70% of our resources are going to be going, and 30% of the resources are going to be reserved for reacting to.
Mówi, że około 70% ich zasobów zawsze idzie na zaplanowany z góry półroczny, można powiedzieć, plan rozwoju Albiona, a 30% około idzie na bieżące sprawy.
Because you need to talk to people about concepts. The longer the game runs,
no
honestly, the more challenging it becomes to make changes.
Monster to przecież był filmik już o tym. Cały filmik możesz sobie zobaczyć, gdzie ładnie o tym opowiadam. To był specjal na 5 milionów wyświetleń.
This is no longer just my design space in which I can make changes. I have to take into account
faktycznie, zapomniałem
what have the players
zmienić.
done with it and how much can I still support what they're doing.
Zaraz zmienimy.
With my new concept, and you have to worry about obviously data migration as well, and can't just in the alpha things were easy. In the alpha we would just say everything gets wiped. Actually, that's the opportunity to show my artifact from the
Dobra,
from the
już
alpha
zmieniłem, nie ma
days.
Hellgate'ów, jest DevTalk.
Wipe hype shirt. That hasn't been around for.
It's got the Albion logo on it and everything.
Yeah.
So it's
Ja,
like
historię
official.
masz.
Albion
Tutaj
Wipe
Robin
Hype.
ci
I
wyciąga
wore this
koszulkę.
in a-
Wipe hype.
Dev talk during the alpha days because wipe hype was such a it was a phrase that was going around, right? Like everybody was excited about wipes. Obviously we don't have any wipes anymore, and that makes things challenging sometimes, to be fair, and it doesn't get easier the more advanced
O Jezus.
the game has become, but obviously it's also we can do bigger things now. We have the resources,
Mówisz?
and we also have the
Frosty?
time frames. We feel the game doesn't need
Tak,
to
koszulka na przykład
constantly get
kontentu.
things necessarily to at least
No,
like in
no
terms of
tak,
features, there's a
no.
lot of features there now
Albion
already.
ogólnie
So we can
bazuje na
focus
legendach
resources into
z
bigger,
wysp, nie? Z Wielkiej
changes.
Brytanii.
in a way.
No,
I
Anglia
feel
ogólnie.
like the
Chodzi
switch
o
from,
te wyspy.
what was it, 3 updates
Tam
per year to
legendy
2
właśnie
really allowed you
odnośnie
guys to do
Merlina
more
i
in-depth
Artura,
updates that really have improved the game
na których
absolute
i
ton.
serial był
But,
zbudowany
you pretty much
i
answered all the questions
uniwersum
I had
te
for
magiczne,
this interview,
uniwersum
but I know
Albiona,
that
prawda?
Marco, he has been chomping at the bit to
Także
ask
to jest
his
taki
questions, and I'm sure he's
background
got some very important
historyczny,
ones. Marco, do you have
jeśli
any
by ktoś
questions?
chciał się w to zanurzyć,
It's
a
one word.
oczywiście z tego
Dragons?
można dużo czerpać, bo tych opowieści jest wiele, także jasne, mogliby z tego czerpać, ale myślę, że za bardzo odbiegli od źródła, żeby to się tak,
Okay,
można
yeah.
powiedzieć,
As soon
ładnie
as somebody can
spasowało.
invent a dragon
Musieliby
without a
też te
tail,
historyjki
we'll be
mocno
all set.
naciągać, żeby
Sounds great.
żeby
But
faktycznie...
thank you guys so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. I guess
Co,
I do have
z
one
koniec?
last question for you guys before I do let you go. Do you have any plans to celebrate this on Sunday? Because Sunday is a huge day for all. Are you guys gonna all get together and have an in-office celebration? Maybe without Robin?
Yeah, I'm gonna miss it. Our big anniversary party is tomorrow.
Yeah.
David is hosting.
Yeah, I am. I have a very big garden, so I'm always hosting our parties. So
Jutro
yeah,
mają jakąś wielką
let's
imprezę w biurze
celebrate
odnośnie właśnie tej 5.
tomorrow.
rocznicy Albiona.
We're gonna have cocktails and barbecue.
Jak
and
odebrać
we're
te
gonna
skrzynie?
celebrate
Wystarczy
well
mieć
Sunday.
połączonego Twitcha z Albionem,
Sounds fantastic.
klikasz
I'm so proud
dropy
of everything
na
you guys have
Twitchu,
done. Robin, you look like
tutaj
you have something
klikasz
else you wanna
sobie w
say.
siebie,
Yeah,
klikasz
I mean,
dropy
I wanna invite the players to
i tutaj ci się
join
otwiera
the
takie okienko i tutaj
anniversary
będziesz miał
celebration
do
game, of
odbioru.
course, with the ongoing
Jeśli
anniversary
masz
event.
połączone oczywiście konto
I'm really
z
looking forward to your
Albionem.
feedback on this one.
konto Twitcha.
We
Gdzieś to
love
tutaj było.
the idea of bringing Albion's history to life and you know recognizing that Albion is a
O,
world
tutaj.
built
Widzisz?
by players and that these
Tutaj musisz
players
mieć
leave
połączone.
legacy and
Jak
that
nie masz
you're
połączone, to ci
in
nie
this
dropnie.
with us. And I
No i
wanna
potem
thank
klikasz
you all
odbiór i ci w
for
gierce wyskakuje po prawej do
playing
góry.
our game, enjoying
I
our
jak
game, for all
klikniesz
the
w gierce, żeby
feedback,
odebrać, no
input
to
that we get from
wtedy
you guys.
wskoczy ci do EQ
And
po
we're
prostu.
really looking forward to the next 5 years with you, and way beyond that, hopefully.
As am I. It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys so much.
Co, to jest
David,
koniec?
Michael, Robin, all the
Ja
guys here
pierniczę,
at
straciłem
AOTV
2
who
godziny
worked
życia.
behind the scenes, and everybody at SBI who helped to make this show possible. I want to thank you all so much for this. It's been a tremendous success. Thank you so much, and we hope to do it again, maybe in less time than 5 years from now. I'd love to have you guys back on again soon.
Nie powtarzajcie tego.
It's
Shozen pyta się,
question
czy
of
powtórzą to szybciej niż za 5 lat.
Yeah,
We
thanks a
will
lot.
be back.
All right, thank you guys. We are gonna play some fan art from throughout the years. We'll play that so you guys have an elongated chance to get the Twitch drop, the exclusive Twitch drop that was made available today for this stream. And we will even try to get another replay of this stream up and available for you, as well as putting it on YouTube. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for being here. It's been a pleasure. We're out.
Aha, koniec. Jezus, nic nie powiedzieli nowego. Nic. 2 godziny i nie dali żadnego info odnośnie co będzie się działo w przyszłości, rozumiecie? Wszystko co powiedzieli. Tak, mogłem drzewie farmić. Ja pierdzielę. Wszystko co powiedzieli, to już wiedzieliśmy. O mistach wiedzieliśmy. Już pracują nad tym od pół roku. O systemie rekrutacji do gildii wiedzieliśmy, bo to już mówili przy poprzednim update'cie. coś tam wspomnieli o chyba Arkane'ach, ale to wiadomo, że Arkane i Frosty będą update'owane, bo już o tym mówili w poprzednich devtalkach. Nic nowego nie powiedzieli, nic. A jedyne co dostaliśmy z tego streama to jakiś dywanik, który sprzedamy sobie za 100 000 już za niedługo i skrzyneczkę, z której nie wypadło nic. Jedyne co mi się podobało, no to faktycznie tutaj powiem wam szczerze, że możemy sami sobie wrócić. Dobra. Możemy sami sobie wrócić. O, patrzcie jaka grafika. Powiem wam szczerze, że może... A, dokładnie. Czekajcie, możemy sobie tutaj sami wrócić do przedpoczątków Albiona i pooglądać jeszcze raz jak to wyglądało. Także zobaczcie, to jest jedyne co na tym streamie było wartościowe. Tak naprawdę. To jak pokazali jak ta giereczka wyglądała kiedyś. Naprawdę kiedyś. 10 lat temu. Zobaczcie jakie to było piękne. Pokrywam się z tym drugim Miłoszem? Tak. Z tym drugim M-ką się pokrywam. O, tam gdzieś z tyłu, widzicie? Siedzi. Za moim krzesłem się chowa. Skubaniec, patrzcie. O, siema. No, w każdym razie to jedyne co mi się tak naprawdę podobało, nie? Tak, jest progres faktycznie. Także możemy tutaj sobie ewentualnie podejrzeć. Jakby ktoś chciał, to prawdopodobnie zrobię z tego shorta. Po prostu no po prostu wytnę ten kawałek i zrobię z tego odcinek z samego tego elementu, gdzie pokazywali faktycznie jak wyglądał Albion X lat temu, nie? 10 lat temu. Także tutaj, no to było fajne. To była jedyna część tego streama, która mi się naprawdę podobała. Jak oni się tutaj naparzają, właśnie w takich śmiesznych strojach jeszcze, można powiedzieć, pradawnych. No nic. Ale to by było na tyle, także... Tak, grafa poziom Tibia. Także myślę, że... Tutaj chyba trzeba zamknąć po prostu temat. No dobra, to na koniec streama, żeby wam smutno nie było, że takie nudy i smęty, to jeszcze zróbmy sobie gipsa, czyli jaką by chcemy, o dobra, może dywan, pyk, takie hasło sobie zrobimy. Zapraszam was do wzięcia udziału w giveawayu na 400 000, wystarczy napisać na czacie dywan i bierzecie udział. Także ja już dla was przygotowuję itemki. Tutaj jakieś w sumie przypadkowe. O, chociaż ta czapka mi się przyda. Przypadkowe itemki. O, trochę mnie poniosło. 400. Okej. Jeszcze jakieś buty, żebyście mieli czym to w ogóle zanieść. Okej. Także zrobimy sobie jeszcze tego giveawaya i zrobimy sobie jeszcze jednego giveawaya tylko dla wspierających i będziemy lecieć. Także... No cóż... Z całego serca przepraszam was bardzo, że takim syfem nas devsi dzisiaj potraktowali. Jak zobaczyłem ten pierwszy filmik dzisiaj, pierwszy i jedyny, to ja myślałem, że będzie takich materiałów więcej, że będą na przestrzeni lat. Wiecie, jakie by to było super, ten moment, kiedy pokazali faktycznie coś i jakby zrobili tego streama właśnie w ten sposób. Trochę pogadali i powiedzmy, o, zaczynaliśmy grę, prawda, tworzyć, mieliśmy takie studia, to było spoko, dobra. Mieliśmy tam parę osób, nikt nas nie wierzył, dawali nam te 20% szans, on mówił na sukces, nie mieliśmy inwestorów, dobra, fajnie, spoko. I wtedy mówi, no i... O, widzę, że tutaj ktoś nie odebrał. Okej, już namierzyłem gościa. I... pokazują właśnie ten kawałek z tej wczesnej alfy, czy tam jeszcze nawet deweloperskiej alfy. Pokazują faktycznie, że tak to wyglądało, okej, i teraz znowu, no i pogadamy, no i potem zaczęliśmy robić to i puszczamy filmik znowu, w którym pokazujemy jak album się zmienił po roku kolejnym i znowu, no i wtedy mieliśmy jakichś takich hakerów, coś tam, pierdu, parę minut gadania i znowu filmik. I jakby na tej zasadzie zrobili tego streama, no to on by był mega ciekawy, a jak tylko gadali, bez żadnych materiałów, dosłownie, to jest jedyny materiał, który nam pokazali, no to ten stream zwyczajnie był po prostu przegadany, nudny, no bo ileż można słuchać, nie? Chce się coś pooglądać, no jakbym chciał sobie posłuchać, to bym sobie radio włączył, a nie oglądał devsów. No tyle, że mogłem popatrzeć na ich smętne twarze. Także uważam, że stream, który nam przedstawili, był kompletnie źle poprowadzony. W ogóle mieli dwie osoby, które miały zadawać pytania, z czego tak naprawdę jedna to się 99% czasu tylko uśmiechała, zadała chyba tylko jedno sensowne pytanie, chociaż i tak było one troszkę wymuszone, więc po co w ogóle tą drugą osobę brali? Mógł już tylko Showzen prowadzić, jak tak to miało wyglądać. To było, ten drugi był skrajnie po prostu nieprofesjonalny, a to, że było tak mało materiałów wizualnych na przestrzeni, byście myśleli 5 lat, a to się okazało 10 lat. Na przestrzeni 10 lat pokazali nam jeden filmik. Jeden filmik nagrali i to z samego początku. Czyli jak na samym początku już nagrywali, to czemu później nie nagrywali? Na pewno mają materiały, tylko mają takie leniwe dupy, że nam nic nie pokazali dzisiaj. Także jestem niesamowicie rozczarowany tym, co tutaj się wydarzyło na streamie. Także beznadziejni są. Słuchaj, Nord, zawsze możesz sobie poprzewijać streama. Mówię ci, jedyny ciekawy fragment na dzisiejszym streamie to faktycznie jak pokazywali, jak to wyglądało 10 lat temu. Wtedy naprawdę się dobrze bawiłem. A tak to poza tym się raczej nudziłem przez większość streama. Jeżeli tak jestem w podziwie, że dałem radę wytrzymać te 2 godziny. O boy, dobra. To co, lecimy z giveawayem? Kai, napisz mi jaki masz nick, w Albionie dam ci dostęp do skrzyneczki. Także... No to szukaj. W ciągu tam pierwszej godziny to było, nie wiem, 30-40 minuta jakoś tak. Ten... można powiedzieć, ten kawałek się pojawił. Także ja sobie właśnie zapiszę też. 30-40 minuta. Trzeba będzie z tego zrobić jakiegoś klipa. Dobra, widzę, że tutaj Kai już mi szybko napisał, jaki ma nick w Albionie. Także już cię dodaję. Proszę cię bardzo, zbieraczy kamienia C, tak się wyspa nazywa. A dla ciebie w magazynku siedzą itemy. Także zerknij sobie tam w wolnej chwili. A ja zapraszam wszystkich wspierających do wzięcia udziału w giveawayu, żeby napisali upośledzoną pandę. O tak. Tyle od was wymagam, wspierających, żeby napisać na czacie upośledzoną pandę i bierzecie udział w giveawayu. Także cyk, ja skaczę na wyspę już przygotowuję ten 1 000 000 w itemkach z Hellgate'ów. Mam nadzieję, że coś tam jeszcze skupniemy z tych Hellgate'ów. No, powiem wam, żeby ci devsi, kurde, naprawdę prowadzili tą grę, jak prowadzili tego streama, to ten Albion już by dawno upadł. Naprawdę. Oj, dawno. Ta czapka moja, dobra. Tutaj, ja nie wiem, gdzie te pieniądze, gdzie ten 1 000 000 w ogóle tutaj siedzi, ale trochę zabiorę. Czekajcie, na pewno to jest wszystko? Nic tutaj nie ma i to też tyle pieniędzy daje? To aż niemożliwe. 21 potek, 21 potek 100 000 ponad, no to coś tutaj robi tą cenę jednak. Dobra. To ja bym zostawił takie, o, 1 007 000. No, może jeszcze coś tutaj dorzucimy. Dobra, nieco ponad 1 100 000, niech będzie. 1 100 000 w skrzyneczce, także zapraszam jeszcze raz wspierających do wzięcia udziału. A ja tutaj sobie odłożę te itemki. To będzie na kolejnego giveawaya. Także na razie ich nie potrzebuję, to niech sobie leżą. Żebym wiedział co do czego. O kurde, a tutaj jakieś... What? Ile tutaj przypadkowych itemów w ogóle leży w tej skrzyneczce? Okej. Trzeba będzie ją posortować jak nic. Dobra. Dobra. No, to co? Ile jest osób w giveawayu dla wspieraków? 2. No to niezły fajcik, panowie. 50-50%. To co, lecimy, co? 50 na 50, byku. Dobra, no to więcej widzę wspierających nie wbija, no to siup. No Nord wygrał, no co mam powiedzieć. Miał 50% szans, także całkiem sporo. Napisz mi Nord, jaki masz nick, w Albionie dam ci dostęp do skrzyneczki. I będziemy na dzisiaj kończyć. Jacobin, troszkę źle obstawiłeś. A, no chyba, że w tym sensie. Okej, to nie było obstawienie. No to troszkę wyrazu smutku. Tixer. Dobra, proszę cię bardzo, już ci daję dostęp do skrzyneczki. Także pyk, na wyspie zbieracze kamienia B masz dostęp do skrzyneczki. Zakładka, magazynek czeka na ciebie. Jest to ponad 1 000 000, także odbierz sobie w wolnej chwili. A ja będę się z wami na dzisiaj żegnał, także oczywiście możecie pisać w komentarzach pod zapisem z tego live'a. Ale jeszcze masz czas. Jeszcze masz czas, chyba do 2 w nocy możesz na tego streama wbić, żeby sobie tą skrzyneczkę nabić. Także powiem wam, że jestem niesamowicie rozczarowany i w komentarzach pod zapisem z live'a możecie oczywiście pisać wasze zażenowanie tym streamem, bo był żenujący jak dla mnie. A jeśli chodzi o mnie, no to co? Ja się zwijam, także bardzo wam dziękuję, że wpadliście, że razem przez to przeboleliśmy. Z tego fragmentu, który mi się podobał, zrobię klipa, a reszta do kosza powinna trafić. Dobra, trzymajcie się, do zobaczenia na kolejnym odcinku bądź live. Do następnego.